The air in Lucas Van Holt's Manhattan penthouse wasn't filled with romantic anticipation. It smelled of espresso, lemon furniture polish, and the quiet hum of money. I, Rowan Thorne, scrolled through a final due diligence report on my tablet. My heels kicked off under the glass conference table. This wasn't a love nest. It was a war room for a friendly merger. The last of the Delaware filings cleared at 4:32 p.m. I said, not looking up, the shell company structure is now effectively invisible. Your father's legal team won't see it coming. Lucas, my soon-to-be husband in the eyes of the law and the society pages, loosened his tie. He looked more like a CEO facing a hostile takeover than a groom. Victoria has been on the phone all day with the wedding planner and the family office, mostly the family office. She's insisting on verifying the guest list against the Forbes list. Again, I allowed a thin smile. Let her. It keeps her focused on the wrong battlefield. I finally looked at him. You're clear on the script for tomorrow? The Love at Stanford. Rekindled story plays better than strategic asset consolidation. Unfortunately, he sighed, pouring 2 fingers of scotch. I know the part. I just hate the performative aspect. The swooning ants. The tears it's demeaning. It's leverage. I corrected, closing the tablet. The spectacle grants us credibility and cover. Your family expects a performance. We're giving them one, a year, maybe 2, until the board transition is secure and the port deal is irreversible. Then, an amicable, quiet dissolution. Our respective assets, per the prenup, walk away untouched and likely increased. Our prenup, a 60-page masterpiece crafted by Davis Polk. It wasn't a document about protecting one party from the other. It was a joint venture agreement. Separate property remained separate. Joint endeavors were split 60/40ths in my favor, reflecting my capital commitment. It was clean, fair, and bulletproof. Lucas raised his glass. To a profitable partnership. My phone buzzed with a calendar alert. To clarity, I replied, just as the penthouse elevator chimed its arrival tone. We hadn't summoned anyone. The only other person with access was. The door slid open, and Victoria Van Holt swept in. She didn't enter a room. She occupied it, dressed in a stark white Valentino sheath that likely cost more than my first car. Her blonde hair was a perfect helmet, her smile a polished knife. Lucas, Rowan, she greeted, her voice like chilled champagne. I hope I'm not interrupting a tete-a-tete. The way she said it implied something sordid. Mother, Lucas said, his posture stiffening automatically. We were just finalizing some last-minute details. How lovely. She glided over, her eyes missing nothing but the 2 glasses, the scattered documents, the absence of any intimate chaos. I, too, have a last-minute detail, a necessary one. She placed a slim, cream-colored folder on the table between us. The Van Holt family crest was embossed on the cover in gold leaf. I leaned back, saying nothing. Lucas frowned. What's this? A supplement to the Wun Chan Shi. Victoria said, her gaze settling on me. It wasn't unfriendly. It was worse. It was the look one gives a potentially useful, but fundamentally unsanitary object. Our family lawyers felt the original document, while thorough, lacked certain protective clauses for the Van Holt legacy, given the unique circumstances of your union. What unique circumstances? Lucas's voice held an edge. Oh, Lucas, don't be naive. She gave a tinkling laugh that held no warmth. Rowan is a lovely, ambitious girl, self-made, we're told. Charming. But let's be practical. The Van Holt fortune spans generations. It must be safeguarded for the bloodline. For your children. She nodded at the folder. This simply ensures that any assets accrued during the marriage, including any future inheritance rights that might be contested, remain firmly under Van Holt control. It's a matter of insulation. I finally spoke, my tone neutral. Professional. Insulation from what? Exactly. Victoria. She met my eyes. From uncertainty. My dear. From the inevitable complexities that arise. This is a standard provision for situations like this. Situations like what? Lucas's knuckles were white on his glass. Victoria's smile didn't waver. We welcome Rowan into the family. Lucas. Truly. But every family has rules. This, she tapped the folder, is the final one. Sign it, and you have our wholehearted blessing. The wedding proceeds as a true celebration. Refuse, she let the word hang. A delicate threat. Well, it would cast such a pall. Your father would be deeply disappointed. The board would have questions about your judgment. It's so much simpler to handle this now. With clarity. The insult was exquisite. She hadn't called me a gold digger. She'd just written the legal definition of one and asked me to sign it. This was the play. Not a veto, but a surrender. A public branding before I was even allowed through the gate. Lucas was livid. This is outrageous. Our agreement is already signed. This is a humiliation. It's a precaution. Victoria cut in, her voice turning to steel. One that any woman who loves you for you would have no issue with. Her eyes challenged me. Go on, they said. Prove me right. Get emotional. Be greedy. Be the thing I'm saying you are. I let the silence stretch for a 3 count. Then, I reached forward and picked up the folder. I didn't open it. I just held it. I see. I said, my voice still calm. Final blessing. Clarity. Those are important. Victoria's triumph was a faint gleam in her eyes. She'd expected tears, defiance, a plea from Lucas. She hadn't expected calm acquiescence. She mistook it for defeat. I'll have my lawyers look it over. I said, of course. Victoria purred. Though time is short, the ceremony is tomorrow. I'd need it signed before you walk down the aisle. For peace of mind. Understood. I gave her a small, polite nod. The kind you'd give a server bringing the check. Seemingly satisfied, Victoria turned to Lucas, cupped his cheek. It's for the best. Darling, you'll see. This protects everyone. With a final, magnanimous smile in my direction, she left as swiftly as she'd arrived, the elevator swallowing her whole. The moment the door shut, Lucas exploded. I won't allow it. This is a disgusting power play. I'll call the lawyers. You'll do nothing, I said, my voice cutting through his anger. I finally opened the folder. My eyes scanned the dense legalese. Waiver of all marital property rights. Renunciation of any claim to future inheritance. Even statutory entitlements. A postnup that would leave me with nothing but my personal effects if we divorced. It was even more comprehensive than I'd expected. Brutal. Rowan, be serious. I am being serious. I looked up at him. This isn't about me. This is a test of your compliance. And a message to me about my permanent, subordinate status. If we fight it now, we're fighting on her turf. In private. With family pressure. She controls the narrative. Headstrong Rowan refuses reasonable safeguard. Lucas led astray. So what? We just sign it, he said, aghast. I closed the folder with a definitive snap. No, we don't sign it. We use it. Use it how? A cold, tactical focus settled over me. This was no longer about merger logistics. This was a counter-ambush. She wants this signed before the ceremony. A private submission. That's her mistake. I met Lucas's furious gaze. You want to send a message that can't be ignored? You don't whisper it in a lawyer's office. You announce it on the battlefield when the maximum number of enemy troops are watching. Understanding dawned slowly. Then a grim, reluctant smirk touched his lips. The wedding. Everyone will be there. The family. The press. The whole damned ecosystem. Exactly, I said, placing the insulting folder neatly beside my sensible tablet. She's handed us the stage and the spotlight. So tomorrow, at the perfect moment, we won't just refuse her supplement. I leaned forward. the city's skyline twinkling behind me like a field of tactical readouts, will dismantle her entire premise in front of God, Vogue, and the entire Van Holt board. That's how you establish the terms of a new alliance. I picked up my scotch. The ice barely melted. Now, let's go over the seating chart again. I want to make sure everyone has a clear view. The morning of the wedding dawned with the crisp, metallic brightness common to late September in the Hamptons. I stood before the floor-to-ceiling window of my suite in the Ocean's Edge estate, watching the staff place the last of the white orchids on the ceremony arch. The lawn stretched to a cliff edge, the Atlantic a vast, indifferent sheet of gray-blue. It was a perfect stage. My mind was not on vows or lace. It was a tactical map. The guest list was a spreadsheet in my head. Van Holt allies old money, manufacturing, cautious. My allies venture capital, tech, disruptive, and neutrals socialites, politicians, media. The seating chart Lucas and I had finalized was a deliberate act of psychological warfare. We'd intertwine the factions, forcing interaction. My Stanford roommate, now a Pulitzer-winning journalist, was placed between Victoria's two most gossipy society aunts. The CEO of the rival shipping firm I fund had just backed was at Charles Van Holt's table. My reflection in the glass showed a woman in a silk robe, her face a mask of calm. Inside, a cold, focused energy hummed. This wasn't nerves. It was the anticipatory clarity I felt before a major, hostile tender offer. Victoria's supplement sat in my sweet safe, a physical embodiment of her miscalculation. She thought she was dealing with an anxious, social climber. She had no idea she just handed her opponent the detonator. A soft knock. My assistant, Anya, entered, her tablet held like a shield. Final head count confirmed. The Times and WSJ are here. As expected, so is a team from Bloomberg. Security is discreet. Per your instructions, Lucas is in the East Wing. He says, and I quote, "The asset is in position and awaiting the signal." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "Good," I said, turning. "And the other item?" Anya produced a simple, unsealed envelope from her folio, printed and signed, as you requested. The notary is on standby, confused but paid triple his usual fee to be available for a sudden authenticity verification. I took the envelope. It contained a single sheet, not the waiver. It was a one-page summary, prepared by my CFO, of Ether Capital's most recent fund performance and my liquid net worth, attested by our auditors, my insurance policy, my opening salvo. I slid it into a hidden compartment within the structured bodice of my wedding gown, which hung nearby at a stunning, minimalist ivory column dress I'd chosen not for its bridal qualities, but for its lack of pockets, folds, or places for anyone to hide things, and for the sleek, architectural lines that said power, not princess. Showtime, I murmured, more to myself than to Anya. The ceremony was set for 4 p.m. The hours bled into a blur of hair, makeup, and the quiet, efficient work of my security detail, confirming communication channels. My parents, bless them, were in their suite, happily unaware of the coming storm, believing completely in the rekindled love narrative. Their joy was the one pang of guilt I allowed myself, and I swiftly buried it under layers of necessity. Protecting this deal was protecting the future of my firm, my employees, their livelihoods. Sentiment was a luxury for people who weren't playing for keeps. At 3:55 p.m., I was declared ready. I looked it. I felt like a weapon sheathed in ivory silk. I met Lucas at the top of the grand staircase that led to the back terrace. He looked like a jeek spread entitled Reluctant Groom as Corporate Warrior. His tuxedo was impeccable, his jaw set. He offered me his arm, his expression unreadable to the guests below. But I saw the tightness around his eyes. Nervous? I asked under my breath. a faint smile on my lips for the benefit of the watching photographer. Only that you'll enjoy this too much. He muttered back, the corner of his mouth twitching. It's not about enjoyment. It's about ROI. We began our descent. A wave of appreciative murmurs and flashes rose to meet us. I scanned the crowd. I saw Victoria, radiant and triumphant near the front. Charles, my soon-to-be father-in-law, looking solemn and vaguely bored. I saw my table of tech titans, their expressions a mix of curiosity and bemusement. And I saw the press, lean and hungry. We took our places under the arch. The officiant, a famously progressive bishop, who was a personal friend of the Van Holts, beamed at us. The standard script began. Words about love, destiny, unity. They washed over me. I kept my gaze steady on Lucas, performing the soft smile, the occasional slight nod. He did the same. We were two seasoned CEOs at a press conference, selling a vision. The bishop reached the part about declarations of intent. If any person present can show just and lawful cause why these two may not be joined in marriage, let them speak now, or forever hold their peace. It was a formality, a beat of silence, filled only with the sound of the wind and distant gulls. Then, Victoria Van Holt stood up. A ripple went through the crowd. Not a shocked gasp, but a low, interested hum. This was unexpected drama. The bishop blinked. Lucas's hand, holding mine, tightened almost imperceptibly. Here we go. Victoria's voice, trained to carry in ballrooms, rang out clear and sweetly apologetic. Your Grace, forgive the interruption. This isn't a cause against the marriage. Per se, it's merely a necessary formality to ensure its blessed and secure future. A family matter. A quick signature. That's all. For peace of mind. She turned her devastating smile on the assembly. A minor legal detail we simply must clear up. It won't take a moment. Charles was frowning, but he didn't intervene. This was the play. Public pressure. A minor detail magnified by 300 witnesses. They meant to sandbag me in front of everyone, counting on my desire to avoid a scene to force compliance. A man I recognized as the Van Holt family's lead counsel, Everett Sloan, emerged from the front row. He carried a leather-bound portfolio. The bishop looked utterly lost. I'm not certain this is the appropriate. It's quite all right, Victoria said, gliding forward as if taking center stage at a charity gala. She stopped before us. Her eyes were on me, bright and hard. Rowan, dear, you understand. We discussed this. Just a signature. Then we can get on with the beautiful ceremony. She held out a hand. Sloan produced a document and an expensive pen. I didn't look at the paper. I looked at Victoria. I let the pleasant, vacant bride expression fade from my face, replaced by the neutral, assessing look I used in boardrooms. The change was subtle, but I saw a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. She'd expected flustered embarrassment or panicked compliance. This document, I said, my voice calm but projecting, the one requiring me to waive all marital property and inheritance rights, the one that would leave me with nothing but my clothes if this marriage ended, that minor detail. A louder murmur from the crowd. The press was scribbling furiously. Lucas stepped slightly forward, his body angled between me and his mother. Mother, this is outrageous. Not here. It's the only place. Lucas, Victoria said, her smile strained. For clarity. For the family. Rowan knows it's just a formality. She was trying to box me in. To use the language of family and unity as a cudgel. I felt it then. A cold spike of anger. Sharp and clean. Not the hot, messy kind, but the kind that focuses the mind to a razor's edge. This was more than an insult. It was an attempt to erase me, to legally negate my worth and agency. At the very moment I was supposed to be celebrating a partnership. They saw a vessel, a supplicant. They were about to learn they were dealing with a principal. I looked at the expectant faces, the confused Bishop, the poised Victoria, the stone-faced Sloane. I looked at Lucas, who gave me a nearly imperceptible nod. The battlefield, the maximum number of enemy troops. I reached out and took the document from Sloane. I didn't look at it. I held it up, turning slightly so the crowd could see the embossed crest. Victoria is right, I said, my voice now carrying easily. Clarity is important. I paused, letting the silence stretch. And since this issue is so critical to the security of this union, it deserves to be addressed with complete transparency, in front of all the people who matter to us. I then did the thing she least expected. I handed the document and the pen back to Sloane. I didn't refuse. I didn't accept. I simply removed it from the immediate frame. Then, I turned and walked the few steps to the officiant's simple wooden podium. I adjusted the microphone. The thump off my heels on the wooden platform echoed in the sudden, absolute quiet. You could hear the wind, the rustle of fabric, the rapid clicking of camera shutters. I saw Victoria's face. The triumph was crystallizing, freezing into something else. Confusion. She thought I was going to sign it there. At the podium, a public capitulation. Charles was leaning forward now, his brow furrowed. My parents looked bewildered. My friends from Silicon Valley were watching with laser focus. I placed my hands on the sides of the podium, not gripping it, just resting there. A CEO at an all-hands meeting, a general addressing the troops. I took a slow breath, my gaze sweeping the sea of faces, finally landing on the Van Holt family block. Before we continue with the beautiful ceremony Victoria mentioned, I began, my voice even, conversational, yet amplified to reach the very back. It seems there's a misconception that needs to be cleared up, a rather significant one about why we're all here today. I saw Victoria's smile finally, completely, vanish. Lucas moved to stand just slightly behind and to the left of me, not as a groom protecting his bride, but as a partner presenting a united front. His presence was silent, solid backup. You've been asked to witness a wedding. I continued, but at its heart, today is about the formalization of a merger, a strategic alliance, and like any good merger, it's built on full disclosure. I let my eyes lock with Victoria's. Her expression was a mask of porcelain, beginning to crack at the edges. So, for the sake of that clarity, let's start with 3 simple facts. The air was electric, crackling with anticipation. I had them, every single one of them. This was no longer Victoria's ambush. It was my opening statement, and I was just getting started. The silence was absolute. It was the kind of quiet that swallows sound. Thick and heavy, broken only by the distant. Indifferent crash of waves against the cliffs. 300 faces were frozen, turned toward me on the platform. I held the pause, letting the tension coil to its breaking point. In that suspended moment, my mind was preternaturally clear, analyzing the audience like a data set. Victoria's porcelain mask is fully cracked now, eyes wide, lips parted slightly. She's not furious yet. She's confused. Her script had no lines for this. Charles has straightened in his front row seat. His vaguely bored expression is gone, replaced by sharp, calculating attention. The board members scattered among the guests are leaning forward. Good. They're listening as businessmen now, not as wedding guests. My parents look pale, worried. I'll have to explain later. My tech friends. I can see the barely suppressed grins. They know a pitch when they hear one. I adjusted my grip on the podium, a deliberate, controlled movement. My wedding band, a simple, thick platinum band Lucas, and I had chosen for its severity, its lack of sentimental fuss to caught the afternoon sun. Fact number 1. I began, my voice calm, measured, a stark contrast to the theatrical tension in the air. It was my boardroom voice, the one that could quiet a room of shouting traders. Concerns my financial standing. Specifically, The assumption that this marriage represents a financial elevation for me. I saw Victoria flinch. Almost imperceptibly, the word elevation was a scalpel, precise and sharp. 5 years ago, I founded Ether Capital with seed money earned from the sale of my first startup, a logistics optimization algorithm, to a competitor you'd all recognize. I named the Silicon Valley behemoth. A low murmur rippled through the crowd. So she's not just a pretty face with a hedge fund nameplate. Ether is a quantitative hedge fund. Our strategy is proprietary. Our results are not. I paused, making eye contact with a particularly smug-looking Van Holt uncle who'd spent the rehearsal dinner asking if I dabbled in stocks. Over the past 5 years, Ether's average annualized return for our investors is 34%. The number hung in the air. In the world of old money, you didn't talk about returns so crassly. In my world, it was the only number that mattered. The murmur grew louder. I saw the Wall Street Journal reporter elbow his photographer. My personal stake in Ether, combined with my majority holdings in 2 of its portfolio companies, Valkyrie Logistics and Kestrel AI, both currently valued as unicorns, that gives me a net worth. As of last Friday's close, I let my gaze sweep over the Van Holt family of approximately $4.7 billion. Conservatively, the silence shattered. It wasn't a gasp, it was a collective, sharp intake of breath, followed by an explosive buzz of conversation. Cameras went into a frenzy. Charles Van Holt's face lost all its color. He looked at his son, but Lucas's expression was unreadable. His arms crossed, a sentinel at my shoulder. He knew. He's always known. Victoria's hand flew to her throat. Her composure was in tatters. This is outrageous, she finally managed, her voice trembling with a mixture of fury and disbelief. A vulgar display. At your own wedding. I tilted my head, the microphone catching the movement. Is it, Victoria, or is it just a data point? You presented a legal document predicated on the assumption that I need financial protection from your family. I'm merely correcting the factual baseline. I turned back to the crowd. For those who require verification, the audits are conducted by PricewaterhouseCoopers. My firm's prime brokerage relationships are with Goldman Sachs and Morgan Stanley. I'm sure a call to either would satisfy any doubts. I said the last word while looking directly at Victoria's brother, a man who sat on the Van Holt board and whose own much-touted investment portfolio had reportedly bled money last quarter. The buzz grew louder. I could pick out snippets. Dot told you she was at Davos last year. Kestrel AI, that's the one that just got the Pentagon contract. For $0.7 billion? Charles isn't worth that personally. Good. Let them do the math. The power dynamic in the garden had irrevocably shifted. I wasn't a petitioner at the gates. I was a neighboring power, announcing my borders. An older gentleman, a Van Holt family friend with a patrician bearing, stood up. Young lady, he boomed, attempting to restore order with sheer volume. This is highly irregular, and frankly, unseemly. A lady's finances are a private matter. I offered him a thin, cool smile. Mr. Pembroke, isn't it? Of Pembroke Sons trustees? You're correct. They are private, or at least, they were, until I was handed a legally binding waiver of my rights in front of 300 people and asked to sign it as a condition of saying I do. My voice hardened, just a fraction. When you make my finances the cornerstone of a public ultimatum, sir, you forfeit the right to call them private. You made them the business of everyone here. I'm just providing the accurate figures. He spluttered, sinking back into his seat. Red-faced, I leaned slightly into the microphone, commanding the room's attention back. The initial shock was wearing off, replaced by a rapt, almost greedy fascination. This was better than the ceremony. This was blood in the water, and the sharks were circling, but I was the one holding the spear. The point, I continued, my tone softening back to analytical, is not the number itself. The point is the misconception. Lucas and I are not merging out of financial necessity on my part. This union, from a balance sheet perspective, is a strategic horizontal merger. My liquidity and expertise in tech and logistics for the Van Holt Group's industrial assets and market reach. I glanced at Lucas. He gave a single, slow nod of agreement. A partnership, publicly affirmed. Charles finally found his voice. It was low, strained, cutting through the noise. Rowan, this is neither the time nor the place for a prospectus. He was trying to regain control, to frame my truth-telling as a breach of decorum, a hysterical woman shouting numbers. I turned to him, my would-be father-in-law, the man who had, in our one private meeting, patronizingly advised me to let the men handle the complicated business and focus on planning the wedding. The memory steeled my resolve. I agree. Charles, I said, and the use of his first name, without the Mr. Van Holt, was a deliberate stripping away of hierarchy. It isn't. The place for a prospectus was in your boardroom. When you reviewed the joint venture proposal Lucas and I submitted 3 months ago, the one you tabled, indefinitely, I saw his eyes narrow. He hadn't expected me to know that. The time was when your lawyers drafted that supplemental clause, which is less a prenuptial agreement and more a statement of conquest. You chose to make my worth the topic of today. I'm simply accepting the invitation to discuss it. With the correct figures, a strange sound came from Victoria. It was half a sob, half a strangled laugh. She was staring at me as if seeing me for the first time. The carefully curated image of the polished, agreeable, suitably ambitious but not too ambitious fiancé was gone, burned away. In its place was someone she didn't know how to fight, someone who wasn't afraid of the money, because they had their own, someone who wasn't playing the social climbing game by the old rules. This is for every time you helpfully suggested a different dress that I thought. The cold anger a steady flame in my chest. For every time you mentioned a suitable charity board instead of asking about my work. For assuming my ambition was a cute hobby until I could produce an heir. Lucas shifted his weight beside me. I could feel the tension radiating from him, but it was the tension of a coiled spring, not of fear. He was waiting, watching the dominoes fall exactly as we'd not planned in detail, but anticipated in spirit. We'd known a showdown was inevitable. We just hadn't known Victoria would be idiotic enough to hand us a live microphone in the middle of it. I took a sip of water from the glass on the podium, a calculated move to let the implications sink in. The garden was no longer a wedding venue. It was a corporate amphitheater. The scent of orchids was now mixed with the electric tang of scandal and the cold, clean smell of shifting power. So, to recap fact 1, I said, my voice returning to its calm, explanatory tone. The narrative of the opportunistic, what was the term the Post used? Social climber. I let the question hang, and several guests had the decency to look ashamed. It's mathematically false. I am not leveraging this marriage for financial gain. Any objective analysis of the balance sheets would conclude that such leverage, if it exists, runs in more than one direction. I looked away from Charles's ashen face, from Victoria's stunned, furious one, and back to the wider audience, to the reporters whose pencils were flying, to the friends whose faces now shone with fierce pride, to the neutral observers who were watching a dynasty get a very public, very rude awakening that addresses the foundation of the concern. I said, which brings me to fact number 2, the actual nature of my marriage to Lucas. I paused, seeing the fresh wave of confusion and anticipation roll through the crowd. The first truth had been about assets. The second, I knew, would strike at the very heart of the fairy tale they all thought they were here to witness. The anger in my gut had settled into a solid, immovable pillar of resolve. They wanted a contract? Fine. Let's talk about the real contract. The silence that followed my first revelation had morphed. It was no longer shocked stillness. It was the tense, humming quiet of a courtroom after a damning piece of evidence has been entered. The initial bombast of 4.7 billion had detonated, and now we were in the rubble, sifting through the implications. I could see the calculations happening in real time on the faces before me. The Van Holt loyalists were regrouping, their initial shock hardening into defensive hostility. The neutrals were fascinated, leaning in. My allies were a wall of quiet, supportive intensity. Charles is doing the math, I thought, watching his eyes dart minutely, as if reading an invisible spreadsheet. He's comparing my stated net worth to the Van Holt Group's market cap, to his family's liquid holdings. He's realizing that the social climber narrative isn't just broken. It's been a catastrophic intelligence failure. Victoria is still stuck on the humiliation, her cheeks flushed with a blotchy red. She's not thinking about numbers. She's thinking about the gossip columns tomorrow. Good. Let her be distracted by the social fallout while I dismantle the structural one. Fact number 2. I began, my voice cutting through the low buzz that had resumed. It was softer now, but it carried the same weight. Concerns the actual, legal, and strategic nature of my relationship with Lucas. I paused, glancing at him. He met my gaze, his expression one of grim acknowledgement. We were about to strip the last vestige of romantic veneer from the spectacle. There was a strange intimacy in that shared, brutal honesty. The document Victoria presented is a supplement, I said, making air quotes with my fingers, a gesture so colloquial, so unbridled, it made several older guests flinch. But Lucas and I already have a binding agreement, a 63-page one sheet drafted by Davis Polk Wardwell, a respected name, nods from the legally minded in the crowd. It is not a document designed to protect one party from the other. I continued, my tone shifting to the dispassionate clarity of a quarterly earnings call. It is a joint venture agreement. Its core tenets are simple. First, all property held prior to the marriage remains separate. My assets stay mine, his stay his. I looked at Victoria. Second, any income generated during the marriage from our individual efforts remains separate. Third, and most pertinent to today's festivities, any joint business ventures we undertake are governed by a separate operating agreement, with profit distributions based on capital contribution and clearly defined roles. I let that sink in. Joint business ventures that I was talking about our marriage like a merger agreement, because it was our first such venture. I said, is the acquisition of West Coast Container Logistics, a niche port operator with controlling interests in 3 strategic West Coast terminals. I saw Charles's head snap up. His jaw tightened. He knew this company intimately. The acquisition closed 2 weeks ago. The total price was $1.2 billion. Another murmur. This one was more confused. Why was a bride talking about port acquisitions? The capital structure for that acquisition, I went on, deliberately slow, was 70% equity, 30% debt. Of the 70% equity, I turned my body slightly, facing Charles fully. My voice dropped a fraction, becoming almost conversational, which only made it more deadly. I provided 70%. Lucas provided 30%. The garden erupted. This wasn't about personal wealth anymore. This was a direct assault on the Van Holt family business identity. They were industrialists, titans of tangible assets, and I, the supposed interloper, had just outspent the Van Holt heir on an industrial asset in his own backyard. Charles finally stood. He was a tall man, and his anger gave him a formidable presence. That is a private business matter. He boomed, his voice shaking with a fury he could no longer contain. This is my son's wedding. This is grotesque. Is it? I asked, my voice cool against his heat. Or is it the heart of the matter? You're worried about me claiming a piece of the Van Holt legacy through marriage, Charles, while I'm busy buying pieces of it outright, in partnership with your son. The phrasing was brutal, intentional. The West Coast container deal isn't a secret. The SEC filings are public. What isn't public, until now, is the breakdown of the ownership consortium listed as Thornby H. Holdings. LLC, that's me. And him. I gestured between Lucas and myself. Lucas finally spoke, his voice amplified by my microphone's proximity. It's true. Rowan led the deal. Her funds analysis identified the undervaluation. Her relationships secured the debt financing. My contribution was access and the Van Holt name to smooth regulatory concerns. He stated it flatly. As a matter of fact, it was the ultimate corroboration. He wasn't defending me. He was confirming a business report. Victoria found her voice, shrill and cutting. You see, she's using him, using our name. She's a corporate parasite. The insult was weak, desperate. She was lashing out with the only vocabulary she had left. I actually smiled then, a small, cold, utterly humorless smile. It felt alien on my face, this public display of icy contempt. But it was freeing. A parasite. Victoria, does a parasite provide the host with $84 million of its own capital up front? Does a parasite increase the host's asset base and strategic positioning? I shook my head slowly. A teacher disappointed with a particularly slow student. You're applying the wrong framework. This isn't a biological metaphor. It's a financial one. I'm not a parasite. I'm a majority shareholder. The gasp was universal. Majority shareholder. I and the family business of the Van Holt's only son. The violence of the terminology, applied to a marriage, was breathtaking. I've spent a year biting my tongue that I thought, the memory of 100 subtle slights fueling my clarity, smiling through dinners where they discussed me as if I weren't there, nodding while they planned my future as a society wife, allowing them to believe their narrative because the strategic payoff was worth the personal insult. But they had to push. They had to bring out the legal document, the public ultimatum. They forced a renegotiation of terms. And in any renegotiation, you lead with your strongest position. The prenuptial agreement you so disdain. Victoria, I continued, the one you felt the need to supplement, explicitly protects my investment in your son. It ensures that if this joint venture dissolves, my capital and the growth it generates return to me. It is, in essence, a shareholders' agreement. To call what Lucas and I have a traditional marriage, based on romantic love and a transfer of wealth from him to me, is not just inaccurate. I leaned into the microphone, my words precise and final. It's a profound misunderstanding of the contract you're all witnessing today. You're at a board meeting, not a wedding. You just didn't receive the correct agenda. The bishop, forgotten on the sidelines, made a small, helpless sound. The poor man looked as if he wanted the cliff to swallow him whole. An older woman, a Van Holt, and with a face like a startled hawk, stood up. How dare you? You speak of marriage as a business deal. You reduce a sacred union to dollars and cents. Have you no heart? No shame? The question was meant to be a moral kill shot. It was the last refuge of the old guard. Appeal to sentiment, to tradition, to the ineffable things that can't be quantified on a balance sheet. I felt a strange pang then, not of guilt, but of weary recognition. This was the fundamental chasm. They lived in a world of stories, family legacies, social standing, romantic fairy tales. I lived in a world of systems, algorithms, and measurable outcomes. Their power was rooted in narrative. Mine was rooted in data. And today, data was winning. My heart, I said, the words measured, is in building something lasting and significant. My respect for Lucas is rooted in his intelligence, his strategic sense, and his willingness to be a true partner in that endeavor. If that's reducible to dollars and cents in your view, then I suppose I'm guilty. As for shame, I looked at the folder Sloan still clutched, the one that would have legally erased me. I believe the question of shame might be better directed at those who attempted to coerce a signature under threat of public humiliation. Based on a false premise, they were too lazy or too arrogant to verify. It was a nuclear retort. I had taken their moral high ground and salted the earth. Charles sank back into his seat, all the fight seeming to drain out of him. He looked old. Suddenly, he wasn't looking at me or Lucas. He was staring at his hands. I had just publicly revealed that his son's major business, Move, was bankrolled by his new wife, and that the prenup he might have scoffed at was what made that investment possible. The humiliation for him was multifaceted. As a father, as a businessman, as the head of a family whose power was visibly crumbling. Lucas moved closer to me, his shoulder almost touching mine. It wasn't a romantic gesture. It was a tactical alignment. He spoke, his voice low but picked up by the mic. The nature of our union is our business, but since it's been made public business, Rowan's characterization is accurate. This is an alliance, one I entered into willingly, with full understanding. He looked at his parents, his expression unyielding. The only people who seem to have a problem with the terms are those who weren't party to the negotiations. The finality in his voice was shocking, even to me. This was his declaration of independence. He was choosing the alliance with me over blind allegiance to the family mythology. In this public, brutal forum, he was resigning from the role of obedient heir. The air was thick with the fallout. The wedding was in tatters, but the mission was a staggering success. We had publicly redefined the relationship on our terms. The old narrative was dead, but I wasn't finished. A tactical victory was not enough. To secure the long-term position, you had to demonstrate not just strength, but indispensable utility. You had to show the enemy they needed you more than you needed them. I looked out at the sea of faces, at the ruined ceremony, at the Ashen Van Holtz, at the rapt press. The cold anger had burned away, leaving something cleaner, harder, more potent, absolute certainty. Which brings me, I said, my voice regaining its steady, calm pitch, to fact number 3. I saw Charles's head rise slowly. Victoria stared, hollow-eyed. The guests held their breath. They couldn't imagine what else could possibly be left. I allowed myself a small, deliberate pause, making eye contact with the most influential board members in the crowd. This next part wasn't for the family. It was for them. Fact 3 is simple. I said, you need this alliance more than I do. The silence that followed my third statement was different. It wasn't the stunned quiet after the first revelation of my wealth, nor the scandalized hush after the second about the nature of our union. This was a deep, profound, and calculating silence. I had shifted the paradigm entirely. This was no longer a family drama or a romantic scandal. It was a corporate power play, broadcast live to an audience of shareholders, competitors, and the media. I watched the faces, reading them like a complex market ticker. Victoria was broken. The final, devastating truth that they needed me had shattered the last pillar of her worldview. She wasn't just humiliated. She was ideologically bankrupt. The concept that her family, her dynasty, could nade an outsider, a woman she'd dismissed as a social climber, was incomprehensible. She stared at nothing, her hands limp at her sides, the perfect hostess facade reduced to rubble. Charles, however, was a different story. The initial shock and fury on his face had been replaced by a grim, focused intensity. His eyes were no longer on me. They were darting between the key board members in the audience. He was assessing the damage, tallying the votes. He'd heard the weakness in his own company laid bare, and the primal business instinct to survive, to realign, was overpowering the paternal outrage. Good. He's a pragmatist at heart. He'll be the first to fold. The guests were a mosaic of reactions. My tech and finance friends wore expressions of unabashed, fierce pride. A few were even nodding, as if I'd just delivered a flawless IPO roadshow pitch. The old money contingent looked horrified, but beneath the horror, I saw flickers of something else, curiosity, and a grudging, terrible respect. They understood money and power, even if they hated the form it took. The press was in a state of frenzied ecstasy, typing furiously on phones and whispering into recorders. This wasn't a society page tidbit, this was front page. Business section dynamite. The silence stretched for 5 seconds, then 10. It was Lucas who moved first. He stepped fully to my side at the podium, his shoulder solidly against mine. He didn't look at his parents. He looked out at the crowd, his expression calm, resolute, and utterly in control. He reached for the microphone, and I let my hand fall away, ceding the stage to my partner. "Well," Lucas said, his voice dry, amplified, and strangely comforting in its normality. "Now that the corporate overview is concluded," a faint, shocked titter ran through the crowd. The sheer audacity of his understatement broke the tension like a pin popping a balloon. "We seem to be at a crossroads. We can all go home, and the gossip columns will have fodder for a year." He paused, letting the unappealing prospect of a non-wedding, a mere scandal, sink in. Or, he continued, his gaze finding the utterly bewildered bishop, who looked like he'd been transported to an alien planet. "We can proceed with the ceremony we all came here for, the one where 2 people agree to form a partnership in front of their community, with honesty and clear eyes." He turned his head slightly toward me, a question in his eyes. "Your move." It was a masterstroke. He was offering the crowd a narrative salvage. The shocking truth was out, but he was reframing it not as a disaster, but as an unprecedented, brutally honest beginning. He was giving them a way to stay, to witness the climax, to be part of the story rather than just spectators to a train wreck. I looked at the bishop. "Your Grace," I said, my voice returning to a more moderate, respectful tone, "if you're still willing to officiate, we are ready to exchange our vows." The bishop blinked, swallowed hard, and looked from our determined faces to the sea of expectant guests. His role as societal peacemaker warred with his personal sense of propriety. The peacemaker won. He cleared his throat, straightened his vestments, and managed a weak but audible, "The gathered community has spoken. We shall proceed." And so, under a sky that had shifted from bright afternoon to a muted, golden hour glow, Lucas Van Holt and I exchanged the standard, time-honored vows. For richer, for poorer took on a hilariously literal meaning. To have and to hold sounded like a clause from a property agreement. "Till death do us part" felt like the term of a particularly binding merger. We said the words. We placed the rings. We kissed. A brief, firm, sealing the deal press of lips that sparked another frenzy of camera clicks. The applause that followed was thunderous, but it was a strange, chaotic ovation. Part celebration, part cathartic release, part sheer astonishment. The second the bishop pronounced us, the dam broke. The crowd surged, not towards us, initially, but into 100 buzzing, shouting, gossiping knots. It was like the floor of the stock exchange after a major announcement. I saw my parents being swarmed by concerned friends and voracious reporters. My father's face was pale, my mother's etched with worry, but they were holding their ground, giving terse no comments. Lucas's hand found mine, his grip tight. Time for the receiving line from hell. He muttered, his breath warm against my ear. "Stay close." I murmured back, "Watch the exits. Your mother looks like she might either faint or commit homicide." We were immediately enveloped. The first wave was our friends. Mark from Sequoia crushed me in a bear hug. Jesus Christ, Rowan, that was the most savage, beautiful thing I've ever seen. You just did a hostile takeover of your own wedding. Due diligence, I said, managing a real smile for the first time in hours. Anya materialized at my elbow, a glass of champagne in each hand. She swapped out my empty water glass without a word. her eyes wide with adrenaline. Bloomberg wants a comment. The journalist threatening to run with Van Holt's heir weds his VC. I've got 3 law firms who weren't on the guest list calling, offering to represent you pro bono for the inevitable litigation. Tell them all no comment, and tell the law firms we're covered by Davis Polk. I said, taking a long sip. The bubbles tasted like victory and imminent chaos. Then came the Van Holt faction. The approach was hesitant, wary. An uncle by marriage, a mid-level executive at the company, shook Lucas's hand stiffly, then turned to me. He didn't meet my eyes. Remarkable presentation. Rowan. He mumbled. Very thorough. Thank you, Gerald. I said, my tone polite, neutral. I believe in transparency. He scurried away as if I'd threatened him with a spreadsheet. Victoria and Charles were holding court in a corner, surrounded by a protective ring of older relatives and a few sycophantic board members. Victoria was speaking in low, furious tones to her sister, gesturing sharply toward us. Charles was listening to old Mr. Pembroke, his face a stoic mask, but I saw him nod once. Curtly, he was already in damage control mode. I caught his eye across the room. For a second, we just looked at each other. No familial warmth, no paternal disappointment. It was the assessing gaze of 2 generals after a brutal, unexpected skirmish, each taking the other's measure. He gave a minute, almost imperceptible nod, not of approval, of acknowledgement. The game has changed. You are a player. The most surprising interaction came from Evelyn Pierce, the octogenarian matriarch of a rival old money clan and a notorious dragon. She maneuvered her walker through the crowd, her beady eyes fixed on me. The people around us fell silent, watching. She stopped before me, looking me up and down. Then she reached out a bony, jeweled hand and grasped mine. Her grip was surprisingly strong. Young woman, she rasped, her voice like dry leaves. I've been coming to these insufferable things for 70 years. Watching simpering girls marry boys for their trust funds. Watching boys marry arm candy. She leaned in, the scent of lavender and mothballs enveloping me. That, she said, jerking her head toward the now empty ceremony arch, was the first interesting thing to happen at a wedding since the Vanderbilt divorce of '68. You've got teeth. Don't let them file them down. She released my hand, gave a sharp, approving nod to a stunned Lucas, and shuffled away, leaving a wake of awe. It was, I realized, the highest compliment I was likely to get from that world. The planned dinner and dancing were a surreal affair. The band played, people ate lobster and drank champagne, but the energy was electric, fractured. Our table was a fortress. Lucas and I sat like monarchs under siege, receiving a strange parade of well-wishers, critics, and opportunists. A venture capitalist I'd been trying to get a meeting with for months came by to offer congratulations and slipped me his card. For when you're ready to raise the next fund, he said with a wink. At one point, I excused myself to use the restroom. Anya and a discreet security detail shadowed me. In the opulent, marble-lined hallway, I was intercepted. Victoria stood before me, having clearly lain in wait. The blotchy redness had faded, replaced by a cold, pale fury. The human warmth was gone entirely. She was all polished marble and sharp edges. You, she hissed, her voice low and venomous, devoid of its usual melodic affectation. You spiteful, calculating little bitch. You planned this. You humiliated us in front of everyone. I stopped, signaling Anya to hold back. This needed to be faced. No, Victoria, I said, my voice equally quiet, but steady. You humiliated yourself. You brought a contract to a wedding and tried to force me to sign away my humanity. I just read the fine print aloud. You've destroyed everything. She spat. The family's reputation. This day was supposed to be a showcase of Van Holt power and generosity. I finished for her. It was, you showcased your assumptions. your arrogance, and your strategic blindness. The reputation that's damaged is the one built on a fiction. Maybe now you can build one on reality. Her eyes glittered with unshed tears of rage. You'll never be one of us. You'll never be accepted. A genuine, weary laugh escaped me. Victoria, look at me. Do I look like I'm seeking your acceptance? I don't want to be one of you. I want to work with your son to build something stronger than what you have. You can either help, or you can get out of the way, but you don't get to dictate terms anymore. I saw the truth of it hit her. The finality. She had no more leverage, no social pressure, no financial threat, no maternal guilt held any power here. She was looking at a force of nature she didn't understand and couldn't control. For a woman who had built her life on control, it was a death sentence. She took a step back, her composure cracking again. This isn't over. For you. Maybe not, I said, starting to walk past her. For me. The negotiations regarding your family's business are just beginning. Good night, Victoria. I left her standing there in the hallway, a solitary, elegant statue of a vanished era. Later, near midnight, as the party was winding down into drunken, shell-shocked whispers, I found Lucas on a secluded terrace overlooking the dark ocean. The noise from inside was a distant hum. He was leaning on the railing, tie loosened, a glass of amber liquid in his hand. He didn't turn as I approached. Well, Mrs. Van Holt, he said, the title sounding strange and new. I'd say the merger announcement was a success. Volumes are trading through the roof. I came to stand beside him, the cool sea air a relief. There will be fallout. Your mother is a problem for another day. He finished, taking a sip. He finally looked at me. In the moonlight, his expression was unreadable, but the tension that had been in his jaw all day was gone. You were magnificent and terrifying. It was necessary, I said simply, not sure if I was justifying it to him or myself. I know. He was quiet for a moment. My father pulled me aside. He didn't apologize. He asked for a meeting next week to discuss the integration of assets, he said. I nodded. That was the best we could hope for. A cold, corporate peace offering. We'll need a new term sheet. The original partnership agreement just got renegotiated in our favor. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. I'd say so. He turned to fully face me. Thank you for not backing down, for forcing the issue they were too cowardly to address directly. It was the first time he'd acknowledged the personal cost, the sheer brutality of what we'd just done. It wasn't just for the deal. Lucas, I said, surprising myself with the admission. It was for me. He studied my face, then nodded slowly, understanding. I know that, too. He raised his glass. To clear terms, I touched my glass to his, and to a very profitable partnership. We stood in silence, looking out at the dark, restless Atlantic, the traditional first dance, the cake cutting, the throwing of the bouquet. None of that had happened. Our wedding night wouldn't be spent in a romantic suite. We'd be on separate calls with our lawyers and PR teams, managing the fallout. But as I stood there, the adrenaline finally receding, leaving a deep, humming fatigue in its wake, I felt no regret, only a vast, quiet certainty. The old walls had been torn down in the most public way imaginable. The landscape ahead was scorched earth, but it was our landscape now, and we would build something new on it. Something that couldn't be challenged with a piece of paper and a patronizing smile. The war wasn't over. The board meeting loomed. But the first, decisive battle was won. I had walked into their arena, playing by their rules of ceremony and propriety, and I had blown the whole damn thing up with the one thing they understood but never expected me to wield. Superior firepower. I was no longer Rowan Thorne, the ambitious fiancé. I was Rowan Van Holt, the majority shareholder, and the market had just opened. The silence that followed my third statement was a physical presence, thick and heavy, pressing down on the manicured lawn. It wasn't the shocked hush of my first revelation, nor the scandalized gasp of the second. This was the deep, resonant quiet of a detonation that had vaporized the landscape. The old reality that the Van Holt supremacy, the social order, the entire premise of the day, that was gone. In its place was a scorched, smoking plain, and I was standing at its center, the architect of the void. My own heart was a steady, metronomic beat in my ears. The cold, surgical focus that had carried me through the three facts was beginning to thaw at the edges, letting in a trickle of visceral sensation. The weight of 300 stairs was a tangible pressure. The sea salt air felt sharp in my lungs. Victoria's face, 10 yards away, was a study in obliterated certainty. Her eyes, usually so sharp and dismissive, were wide and seeing holes. She wasn't looking at me. She was looking through 'em, at the abyss where her understanding of the world had just vanished. Charles, beside her, had undergone a different transformation. The paternal outrage had been burned away, leaving behind the raw, calculating core of a businessman who'd just seen his company's biggest vulnerability laid bare on a public altar. His jaw was clenched, his hands gripping the arms of his chair, but his mind was visibly racing, assessing, recalculating. He's not thinking about his son's wedding anymore, that I realized. He's thinking about stock prices, board revolts, and damage control. Good, that's a language I can speak. The guests were a frozen tableau of disparate reactions. My friends from the West Coast had lost all pretense of solemnity. Mark from Sequoia had a hand clamped over his mouth, his shoulders shaking with silent, incredulous laughter. Sarah Chun, my former law partner, was nodding slowly, a fierce, proud gleam in her eye, mentally drafting the legal victory memo. The old guard contingent looked like they'd been slapped collectively. Mrs. Abernathy, a dowager whose family money predated the revolution, had actually swooned back into her chair, a bejeweled hand fluttering at her throat. The younger, hungrier socialites and minor heirs were leaning forward, phones discreetly recording, their expressions a mix of horror and enthralled glee. This was the most delicious scandal of the decade, and they had front row seats. The press corps was a hive of silent, frantic activity. The journal reporter was typing so fast his fingers were a blur. The society columnist for the Times looked like she'd just been handed the Pulitzer of gossip. I saw a Bloomberg stringer mouth the words supply chain and algorithm into his phone, already pivoting from the wedding of the year angle to the hostile takeover of the family business angle. The silence stretched, brittle and immense. Lucas was the one who moved. A shift of weight beside me that felt less like a groom support and more like a co-CEO stepping forward to close the deal. He reached for the microphone, his fingers brushing mine as he took it. The contact was brief, electric, a live wire of shared, brutal complicity. Well, he said, and his voice, amplified, was so dry, so utterly, profoundly normal, that it was its own form of dissonance. Now that the corporate overview and forward-looking statements have been concluded, he paused, letting the corporate jargon hang in the air, a deliberate skewering of the pretense that remained. A few more of the stunned guests actually snorted, the tension cracking under the weight of absurdity. We seemed to be at something of an impasse. He looked out, not at his shattered parents, but at the wider audience, including the bishop, who appeared to be praying for a hole to open in the earth. We can all adjourn. I'm sure the canapés are still edible. The gossip, as my new wife so aptly demonstrated, will write itself. He let the unappealing image of anticlimax settled at a fizzled, scandalous non-event. Or, he continued, his gaze sweeping the crowd, finding and holding the eyes of key board members, influential friends. We can proceed with the original purpose of gathering, to witness a partnership, formally entered into, with, as it turns out, a rather unprecedented degree of transparency about its terms. He finally looked at the bishop, his eyebrow raised in polite inquiry. Your Grace? The floor, as they say, is yours if you're still inclined to preside over this particular merger of equals. It was a flawless play. He'd acknowledged the earthquake, then calmly asked if we were still going to have the ribbon-cutting ceremony on the fault line. He was offering everyone a way out, a new, thrilling narrative to participate in, not the fairy tale, but the historic, brutally honest business alliance. He was giving them a chance to be on the right side of a new kind of power. All eyes swung to the bishop. The poor man looked like a theological figurehead caught in a boardroom coup. He cleared his throat, the sound rasping in the quiet. He looked from us, standing united, unapologetic, a fortress of shared resolve, the ashen faces of the Van Holt elders, to the rapt, waiting crowd, his duty to the sacrament warred with the sheer, cataclysmic unorthodoxy of the moment. Finally, with the air of a man jumping from a burning building, he stammered, The community has borne witness. The path of honesty, however unconventional, has been walked. He straightened his vestments, a feeble attempt to reclaim authority. If the couple is ready to proceed to their vows, then in the sight of God and this assembly, we shall. And so, we did. The words to have and to hold had never sounded so much like a property lien. For better, for worse echoed with the ghost of today's carnage. Till death do us part felt like the most ironclad non-compete clause ever devised. We spoke them clearly, calmly, into a silence that was now one of rapt, almost disbelieving attention. The exchange of rings was a clinical, efficient transfer of assets. The kiss was brief, firm, and as contractual as a notary seal. The applause that erupted was deafening, chaotic, a release of pent-up tension, shock, and, for many, a kind of giddy, amoral thrill. The second we were pronounced, the scene dissolved into a kaleidoscope of surreal vignettes. My father, a quiet professor of mathematics, was surrounded by a phalanx of reporters, blinking behind his glasses as questions about algorithmic trading and port logistics were shouted at him. My mother, ever practical, was shepherding him away, throwing out a terse, "No comment. Please, it's their day," with a surreal lack of irony. Lucas's grip on my hand tightened. "Brace for impact," he muttered, as the first wave of people surged toward the makeshift receiving line that had formed at the base of the steps. Our friends came first, a protective, exuberant wave. "Holy shit, Thorne," Mark breathed, clapping me on the back. "You just did a leveraged buyout of the social register." I have never seen anything like that in my life. Sarah simply hugged me, hard, and whispered in my ear, "Discovery is going to be a bitch. I'm so proud of you." Anya materialized, a study in efficient calm amidst the storm. She pressed a fresh glass of champagne into my hand, her other hand holding a phone to her ear. "No, the statement is Mr. and Mrs. Van Holt are grateful for the well wishes on their wedding day and are looking forward to a private celebration. They will have no further comment at this time." Yes, that's the only line. For everyone. She covered the receiver. CNN. Also, your father's Dean called. He's confused but congratulatory, I think. Then came the Van Holt orbiters. Their approaches were hesitant, tinged with a new, wary respect that bordered on fear. Gerald, the cousin who'd made a snide remark about startup volatility at the rehearsal dinner, shook my hand with a damp palm, his eyes unable to meet mine. Remarkable command of the facts. Rowan, really impressive. Due diligence. Gerald, I replied, my voice pleasant. It's a habit. He flinched as if struck and melted back into the crowd. I saw Charles, across the lawn, deep in conversation with two of the older, more conservative board members, Alastair Crampton and Richard Peabody. Their faces were grave. Charles was speaking in low, urgent tones, gesturing with sharp, controlled movements. He wasn't trying to defend or explain. He was containing, managing. He was already treating the fallout as a corporate crisis, not a family disgrace. I watched as Peabody, a man whose fortune was built on steel and paternalism, shook his head, his expression stubborn. But Crampton, the more pragmatic of the two, was listening intently, his eyes occasionally flicking toward me, reassessing. The most jarring encounter was with Evelyn Pierce, the nonagenarian battle axe, leaning on an ornate cane carved from what looked like whalebone, cut through the crowd with the imperious grace of an icebreaker. People parted for her without a word. She stopped before us, her gimlet eyes missing nothing. "Lucas," she said, her voice a dry rustle, "you've married a cannon. I suppose that's more useful in today's world than a decorative vase." She then turned her full, unnerving attention on me. "Young woman, I knew your great-uncle, Phineas Thorne, nasty piece of work, brilliant with railroads, died without a friend to his name, but with a fortune that would make Midas blush." She leaned in. The scent of camphor and old roses was overwhelming. He'd have approved of today. He loved a good, bloody boardroom brawl, said it separated the clerks from the kings. She rapped her cane once on the flagstone. "Don't become a miser, and don't lose your taste for blood. It's the only thing some of these people understand." With that, she turned and sailed away, leaving a profound silence in her wake. The reception that followed was a masterpiece of cognitive dissonance. A jazz quartet played smooth standards. White-gloved servers circulated with champagne and canapes. People laughed, danced, and made small talk, but the subtext was a deafening roar. Every conversation was about what had happened. The dance floor was a whirl of speculation disguised as celebration. Lucas and I were the epicenter, holding court at the head table like wartime monarchs receiving tributes from newly conquered, deeply confused territories. At one point, I excused myself to the restroom. The hallways of the estate, usually so serene, felt charged. I sensed a presence before I saw her. Victoria emerged from an alcove, a ghost in ivory satin. The fury had been refined into something colder, sharper, more dangerous. "You think you've won," she said, her voice a low, venomous wire. No pretense, no social veneer remained. This was the raw ID of the woman. "You've made a spectacle of yourself and my family. You've turned a sacred day into a corporate raid." "No, Victoria," I said, stopping but not retreating. "You made the spectacle when you tried to stage a public signing of my capitulation. I merely changed the terms of the presentation, and a corporate raid implies a hostile takeover of an unwilling target. Lucas was a willing partner. You just weren't consulted. That's the part you can't stomach." Her composure fissured. "He is my son. You've twisted him, poisoned him against us with your spreadsheets and your arrogance." A cold, clear truth settled in me. There was no reaching her. The language of data, of parity, of partnership was alien to her. She spoke only in the dialects of ownership and hierarchy. "I haven't twisted anyone. Victoria, I've presented him with a better offer. One based on mutual respect and shared goals, not on obedience and legacy. He chose it. That's called agency. You should try respecting it." She took a step closer, her eyes blazing. "You will never belong. You will sit in our homes, and you will always be the interloper, the calculator who married in, the help, the insult, meant to wound, barely registered." It was the last, feeble arrow in a spent quiver. "I don't want to belong to your world, Victoria," I said, my voice utterly calm. "I want to change its rules, and after today, I think you'll find I have a seat at the table where those rules are written, whether you set a place for me or not." I began to walk away, the click of my heels echoing in the marble hallway. "This isn't over," she hissed at my retreating back, the words stripped of all power, a desperate incantation. I didn't turn around. "For you, perhaps not," I said over my shoulder. "For me, The next item on the agenda is the board meeting. I'd suggest you prepare. Good night. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of surreal encounters and forced merriment. We cut a stark, beautiful cake that no one tasted. We had a first dance to a slow standard. Lucas's hand firm on my back, my head resting against his shoulder. Two allies in a foxhole, moving in perfect, tactical sync. We left under a shower of rose petals that felt like ironic confetti, escaping to the privacy of Lucas's penthouse in the city, a sanctuary from the storm we'd unleashed. The promised meeting with Charles came not a week later, but the very next morning. The summons was a terse text to Lucas. My office, 10 a.m. Her too. Van Holt Group headquarters occupied the top 15 floors of a midtown tower of glass and steel that screamed old money permanence. The lobby was a cavern of veined marble and whispered deals. Riding the private elevator to the executive suite, I felt none of the anxiety I might have once anticipated. The battlefield had been chosen, the lines drawn. I was in tactical gear. Charles's office was a monument to patriarchal power. Dark wood, leather, framed photos with presidents and kings. A model of a Van Holt cargo ship on the credenza. He stood at the window, his back to us. As we entered, Victoria was not present. That, in itself, was a message. He turned. He looked exhausted, older than he had just yesterday, but his eyes were the same flinty chips of blue. Sit, he said, not a request. We sat in the two heavy chairs facing his monolithic desk. He remained standing. A power play that, he began, his voice gravelly, was the single most destructive display of hubris and familial disrespect I have ever witnessed. You eviscerated your mother. You humiliated this family. You turned a sacred union into a circus sideshow. The anger was there, banked but hot. Lucas didn't flinch. You handed her the whip. Dad, you and Mom. You tried to force her to sign a document declaring herself a pauper and a gold digger in front of everyone she knows. What did you expect? A polite curtsy? I expected discretion. I expected a sense of the larger picture, not a quarterly earnings call from the altar. The larger picture. I said, my voice cutting through the familial tension, is that the Van Holt Group's core shipping and heavy manufacturing divisions have been bleeding cash for 18 months. Your supply chain is a pre-digital relic. Your competitors are using AI-driven logistics and automation you're still evaluating. I leaned forward slightly. The larger picture is that the liquidity and the algorithmic firepower you need to stop the bleeding is sitting right here. Not as a supplicant, as a potential partner. You tried to treat me like a liability to be managed. I am, in fact, the most valuable asset to walk through your doors in a decade. Your move was not just disrespectful. Charles, it was bad business. The use of his first name, in this office, was a deliberate stripping away of the familial facade. This was CEO to CEO. He stared at me, a muscle ticking in his jaw. The paternal outrage was warring with the cold. Hard numbers I'd just referenced. The numbers he'd been staring at in board reports for a year. You have a high opinion of yourself. He finally graded out. I have a fact-based opinion of the situation. I corrected. The presentation yesterday was unorthodox, but it served a purpose. It cleared the air of fiction. We are now left with reality. Your reality is a struggling core business. My reality is $4.7 billion in liquid assets and the key to optimizing your largest cost center. Lucas's reality is that he is the bridge between the two. Charles slowly sank into his high-backed leather chair, the fight seeming to seep out of him, replaced by a weary, calculating pragmatism. What do you want? The question was stripped bare. A white flag in the form of a negotiation opener. A seat on the board. I said without hesitation. Not a ceremonial one. A voting seat. Chairmanship of a new operational committee overseeing supply chain and digital transformation, with executive authority to implement changes. and the withdrawal of all existing, and the forbearance from any future. Legal challenges to the validity or terms of my hunchenshi with Lucas. He barked a short, humorless laugh. You don't want much, do you? I'm offering to save your company. Charles, from itself. I'd say the ask is proportionate to the value delivered. He looked at Lucas. And you? You're on board with this coup? Lucas met his father's gaze evenly. It's not a coup. It's a restructuring. One that's overdue. Rowan's right. We're losing ground every day. She has the capital and the capability to fix it. My onboarding happened months ago, when we structured the West Coast container deal. You chose not to see it. Now you don't have a choice. The silence in the room was profound. The model ship on the credenza seemed to tilt in the storm of the unspoken. Charles looked from his son's resolute face to mine, seeing not a usurper, but a lifeline thrown to a sinking ship he captained. The anger drained away completely, leaving only a grim, exhausted acceptance. The board will never allow it, he said, but it was a token resistance. The last wall of a fallen city. The board will follow your lead. I countered, and if they don't, Lucas and I take our capital and our port acquisition, and we form a competing logistics group. We'll poach your best clients with better rates, powered by my models. We'll hire away your frustrated mid-level managers. We'll do to Van Holt what Van Holt should have done to its competitors 5 years ago. I let the thread hang, clean and sharp. Or, you can bring us in. You can get the capital injection without the dilution of a public offering. You can get the tech upgrade without the multi-year, billion-dollar R&D project. You get a new, hungry generation of leadership. And you get to keep the family name on the building. I had him. I could see it in the slight slump of his shoulders, in the way his eyes lost their defensive focus and turned inward, running the numbers, weighing the annihilation of pride against the survival of the empire. The patriarch was yielding to the pragmatist. The board meets Thursday, he said finally, his voice flat. I'll add an item to the agenda for the creation of a new digital transformation committee. He looked at me, a world of bitter defeat and reluctant respect in his eyes. You'll have to be ratified. It won't be a coronation. Crampton and Peabody will fight you. Others will follow. I stood up, the meeting clearly over. I don't expect a coronation. Charles, I expect a debate, and I'm very well prepared. I extended my hand across the desk, not in familial affection, but in professional closure of a deal. He looked at my hand for a long moment, as if it were a foreign object. Then, slowly, he reached out and shook it. His grip was firm, cold, and final. Thursday, then, he said. Thursday, I confirmed. As we left the office, the silent, plush corridors of Van Holt power seeming to swallow our footsteps. Lucas let out a long, slow breath. Jesus, he muttered. That, I said, the adrenaline of the confrontation finally beginning to recede, leaving a deep, humming fatigue, was the easy part. The board is where the real war is. He looked at me, a strange expression on his face, not quite admiration, not quite awe, something more complex. You were bluffing about starting a competing group, the non-compete clauses in our agreements, the capital lockups. I met his gaze as the elevator doors closed. The best bluffs, Lucas, are the ones you're fully prepared to carry out. I had the lawyers draw up the incorporation papers for Ether Logistics last night. A slow, genuine smile spread across his face for the first time in days. It wasn't the smile of a new husband. It was the smile of a partner who's just realized he's backed the right. Utterly ruthless. Hoarse. The elevator began its descent, carrying us down from the summit of the old order into the uncertain, exhilarating future we had just claimed. The 48th floor of the Van Holt Tower wasn't just a location. It was a state of being. The air was filtered, chilled, and carried the faint, clean scent of money and mahogany polish. Silence reigned. A deep, expensive quiet broken only by the whisper of wool on leather and the occasional hushed, pre-meeting murmur. Standing before the double doors of the main boardroom, flanked by Lucas and my own small retinue, Anya, my CFO David Chin, and Jonathan from Davis, Polk, I felt a different kind of tension than the one on the wedding lawn. This wasn't about shock and awe. This was about the meticulous, grinding work of institutional capture. The audience was smaller, just 12 voting members plus Charles, but the stakes were infinitely higher. This was where the real power lived. And I was here to claim a room in its house. Lucas adjusted his cufflink. A minute. Nervous gesture. Peabody arrived an hour early. He's been in with my father and Crampton, plotting their defense. No doubt. Let them, I said, my voice low. My gaze was fixed on the door's polished brass handle. They're defending a bankrupt position. We're proposing the bailout. Remember the frame. I wasn't Rowan Thorne, the upstart bride. I was Rowan Van Holt, principal of Ether Capital, majority partner in Thorne VH Holdings, and the solution to a quantifiable, 9-figure problem. I smoothed the lapel of my Stark, Navy Alexander Wong suit. The dress was armor. This was a uniform. The doors opened, swung inward by an unseen attendant. The room was exactly as I'd imagined from Lucas's descriptions. A vast oval of gleaming walnut. A skyline view of Midtown Manhattan as a backdrop. Leather chairs so deep they seemed to swallow sound. The 12 men and 1 woman, Elise Vance. The token diversity hire and, I knew from my research, the sharpest analyst on the board, turned as one. The weight of their collective gaze was a physical thing, dense with skepticism, curiosity, and outright hostility. Charles sat at the head, a diminished king. Come in, he said, his voice devoid of warmth. We're adding item 7C to the agenda. Proposal for the creation of a digital transformation and operational efficiency committee. We took the 3 seats reserved for us at the foot of the table, directly opposite Charles. It felt deliberate, like facing a firing squad. David and Jonathan sat behind us in the observer chairs. I placed my folio on the table, aligning it perfectly with the edge. Richard Peabody, a man whose face was a topographical map of displeasure, spoke first. He didn't look at me, he addressed Charles. Charles, I must reiterate my profound objection to this theatrical addition to our agenda. We have a full docket of serious matters. The quarterly projections from the Gulf Coast shipyards, the union negotiations in Ohio. This is hardly the time for, he finally flicked his eyes toward me, for vanity projects. Hardly a vanity project. Richard, Lucas said, his tone conversational but edged. Unless you consider stopping an annualized 12% bleed in our logistics division a matter of vanity. Alastair Crampton, silver-haired and impeccably tailored, steepled his fingers. The challenges in logistics are well known. Lucas, they're cyclical. What's being proposed today feels precipitous and personal. His eyes, pale and shrewd, settled on me. Ms. Thorne, Van Holt. I corrected gently, the interruption a soft, precise dart. A flicker of irritation crossed his face. Ms. Van Holt, the spectacle at the wedding. It displayed a concerning disregard for propriety and stability. The board values discretion. We are stewards of a century-old legacy, not participants in a reality television show. And there it is, I thought, the first volley, not against my idea, but against my character, the hysterical woman trope. Corporatized, I felt a cool, focused calm settle over me. This was a playbook I knew. Mr. Crampton, I began, my voice clear and measured, carrying without strain in the quiet room. You're correct. The board are stewards, and as stewards, your primary fiduciary duty is to the financial health of the Van Holt Group and its shareholders. Would you agree that allowing a core division to hemorrhage nearly $1 billion over 18 months, while citing cyclical challenges and ignoring available, proven technological solutions, constitutes a failure of that duty? The room went very still. Crampton's cheeks flushed. That is a gross oversimplification and an impertinent. Is it? I opened my folio, withdrawing a slim stack of documents. Anya rose silently and began placing copies before each board member. Page 1 is a summary, derived from your own internal SEC filings and operational reports, of the losses. Page 2 is a benchmark analysis against our three main competitors. They've implemented the very machine learning logistics optimization I'm proposing. Their cost per container mile has dropped an average of 22%. Ours has risen 8. That's a 30-point competitive gap you're stewarding. Elise Vance was already scanning the document, her brow furrowed in concentration. Others looked at the numbers as if they were written in a foreign alphabet. Peabody scoffed, pushing the papers away. Charts and graphs from a software person. This is heavy industry. Young woman. It's about ships and steel and men who've been working the yards for 40 years. Not about algorithms. He spat the word like a curse. Those men who've been working the yards for 40 years. I said, turning my full attention to him, are currently waiting an average of 48 hours for delayed part shipments because your inventory forecasting is done on spreadsheets from 2003. They're paid to work, Mr. Peabody, not to wait. My algorithm, as you call it, would cut that wait time to under 6 hours, increasing their productive time and your output. It's not about replacing men. It's about making their labor and your capital more effective. Lucas jumped in. The initial proposal Rowan and I have drafted involves a significant capital injection from Ether Capital, $500 million, specifically earmarked for the supply chain overhaul and the digital retooling of the Ohio manufacturing plants. It's structured as a convertible note, preferential to the company, with a below-market coupon. It's not a hostile takeover, it's a rescue line. Charles finally spoke, his voice weary. The terms of the note are generous. The capital is needed. The operational logic is, regrettably, sound. Each word seemed to cost him. He was validating me in front of his peers, and it was an exquisite torture for him. Peabody slammed a meaty hand on the table. So that's it? We're just a hand over a board seat and the keys to the kingdom to this. This girl, because she married the heir and can read a profit and loss statement? This is a family business, not a Silicon Valley incubator. The word girl hung in the air, ugly and deliberate. I saw Elise Vance's lips tighten. Lucas stiffened beside me. I remained perfectly still. Mr. Peabody, I said, my voice dropping a dangerous octave. The room leaned in. Instinctively, how many billions in market capitalization has the family business lost over the last 5 years while you've been on the board, voting against every major technological upgrade as too risky or not our way? His face mottled purple. How dare you? I dare. I cut in, the ice in my voice absolute, because I am now a significant stakeholder through my marriage, yes, but more directly, through my $500 million offer, and through my controlling interest in the West Coast container terminals, which now handle 15% of the cargo that currently flows through your more expensive, less efficient Gulf ports. I let that sink in. I wasn't just an outsider with ideas. I was a competitor who had already bought a piece of their playground. You have a choice. You can continue to preside over the managed decline of this company, clinging to the way things have always been done until there's nothing left but a logo on a bankrupt filing. Or you can accept that the world has changed and allow someone who understands the new world to help you navigate it. That sounds remarkably like an ultimatum. Crampton said coldly, "It's a proposal, Alistair," Charles said, pinching the bridge of his nose. "One we need to vote on. The committee creation, the board seat for Rowan, and the authority to execute the initial phase of the transformation, reporting directly to this board. And if we vote no," Peabody challenged, crossing his arms, a boulder in the path. I looked at Charles, then at Lucas. This was the moment for the alternative we discussed. Lucas gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. Then Ether Capital withdraws its offer of the $500 million convertible note. I said, my tone shifting to one of pure, dispassionate business. Thorn VH Holdings will suspend all collaborative discussions with the Van Holt Group regarding our port assets. Furthermore, given the board's demonstrated disregard for modernizing its core business, Lucas and I would feel compelled to reevaluate our personal holdings within the group. I paused, letting the threat of a mass sell-off by the heir and his powerful wife register. And finally, I will instruct my legal team to proceed with incorporation of Ether Logistics, a standalone entity that will directly compete in your most vulnerable market segments, leveraging the very systems you're today rejecting. The silence was utter. I hadn't raised my voice. I'd simply laid out the financial consequences of refusal. It was a checkmate in 3 moves: denial of capital, loss of synergy, and creation of a well-funded, tech-savvy competitor. It wasn't a family squabble. It was a corporate nightmare scenario. Elise Vance broke the silence. The proposal for the committee. Could you outline its specific, initial 18-month goals and the metrics for success? She was bypassing the drama, speaking directly to the deal. She was my first, crucial ally. I spent the next 20 minutes walking them through it, not with florid language, but with milestones, KPIs, budget allocations, and risk mitigation tables. I spoke of sensor integration in warehouses, predictive maintenance for the shipping fleet, dynamic routing models. I translated the algorithms into diesel fuel savings, reduced idle time, faster inventory turnover. I made it boring. I made it inevitable. When I finished, the room was quiet again, but the quality of the silence had changed. The outrage had been replaced by grim calculation. They were businessmen. They understood force majeure. Charles called the vote, all in favor of the creation of the Digital Transformation and Operational Efficiency Committee, with Rowan Van Holt appointed as its chair and granted a voting seat on this board, with the authority to execute the first phase plan as outlined. One by one, hands went up. Elise Vance's was first, swift and decisive. A few others, younger or more pragmatic, followed. Lucas's hand was up. Of course, Charles, his face a mask, slowly raised his. The nays were Peabody, Crampton, and 2 older members who were Peabody's shadows. The motion carries. Charles intoned. The words final. Peabody stood up, his chair screeching back. This is a disgrace, a surrender. You're selling your birthright for a mess of silicon. He glared at me, pure, undiluted hatred in his eyes. This isn't over. The shareholders won't stand for the circus. I met his gaze, unblinking. The shareholders, Mr. Peabody, want a return on their investment, starting today, for the first time in a long while. They're going to get one. You're welcome to stay and help, or you can leave. The committee's work begins now, and we have no time for sentimentality. He stared at me, speechless for perhaps the first time in his adult life. Then, with a sound of disgust, he turned and stormed out of the boardroom. The heavy door, thudding, shut behind him. The meeting dissolved into awkward murmurs. Crampton collected his things, gave Charles a curt, disappointed nod, and left without a word to me. The others filed out, a few stopping to give Lucas or Charles a word of strained congratulations or caution. Soon, it was just Charles, Lucas, and me in the vast room. The Manhattan skyline glittered. Indifferent, Charles didn't look at us. He stared at the empty seat where Peabody had been. You got what you wanted, he said, his voice hollow. No, I said, standing, gathering my folio. The company got what it needed. There's a difference. I walked toward the door, Lucas falling into step beside me. I stopped at the threshold and looked back at the broken patriarch. The first committee meeting is Monday. Charles, I'll expect your operational leads to be present and prepared. The clock on those 18-month goals starts now. We exited into the hushed corridor. The moment the door closed, Lucas let out a long, shaky breath, running a hand through his hair. My God, I thought Peabody was going to have an aneurysm. He might yet, I said, but the fight was draining from me, replaced by a deep, resonating fatigue. The victory was complete, but it tasted of ash and other people's shattered pride. As we walked toward the elevator, a side door opened, and Victoria stepped out. She must have been waiting in an adjoining anteroom, listening. Her face was bone-white, her eyes red-rimmed. She looked at Lucas, a world of betrayed anguish in her gaze. Then she looked at me, and the hatred there made Peabody seem tame. It was personal, primal, and bottomless. You, she whispered, the sound carrying in the quiet hall. You've taken my son. You've broken my husband. You've stolen my family's legacy. I will spend every day I have left making you regret you ever set foot in our lives. There was nothing left to say. No business logic applied here. This was the festering, human wound beneath the corporate triumph. Lucas stepped slightly in front of me, a protective gesture that was as instinctive as it was futile against this kind of venom. Mother, don't you mother me. She hissed, her composure shredding. You chose her. You made your bed. Now you get to lie in the cold, calculated emptiness of it. With a last, scathing look that swept over both of us, she turned and walked away, her heels clicking a sharp, receding tattoo of defeat and enduring war. The elevator arrived. We rode down in silence. The digital display counted the floors, a descent from the rarefied air of the boardroom to the mundane bustle of the street. The battle for the board was won. The war for the soul of the company had begun, but the personal, poisonous conflict with Victoria, I knew, was a forever war, and some victories, no matter how strategically sound, left a residue that no amount of power or money could ever fully cleanse. The Ether Capital offices occupied the top 3 floors of a sleek, glass tower in Hudson Yards, a world away from the granite fortresses of Old Wall Street. Here, the air hummed with server farms and ambition, not the ghost of dead industrialists. 6 months after the boardroom coup, the space was a monument to the new power dynamic. My desk, a vast slab of carbon fiber, faced a floor-to-ceiling window offering a defiant, parallel view of the Van Holt Tower to the east. The message was subtle but unmistakable. We see you. We're watching. And we're no longer asking for permission. I scrolled through the final Q3 reports on my tablet. The numbers were a symphony. Van Holt Group's logistics division, under the relentless, algorithm-driven overhaul of my committee, had posted its first quarterly profit in 2 years. The Ohio plants, after a brutal but efficient retooling, had landed a Pentagon subcontract that had Peabody sputtering in impotent fury at the last board meeting. The $500 million convertible note from Ether was already being talked about as the deal of the year, with its conversion price looking more generous to Van Holt by the day as their stock slowly climbed. It was victory by every objective metric. Yet, the quiet in my office felt different from the triumphant focus of the early days. It was a heavier silence, punctuated by the soft tap of Anya's keyboard in the outer room and the distant, muted sounds of the city. The campaign was over. The occupation had begun. And occupation, I was learning, was a colder, lonelier business. My intercom buzzed. Lucas is here, Anya said, and the final numbers from the port acquisition are loaded to the secure server. Send him in. Lucas entered, shedding his overcoat. He looked at home here, in a way he never had in his father's wood-paneled Warren. There was a looseness to his posture, an ease that came from winning. He dropped a folder on my desk. The champagne is on ice downstairs. The vultures from the financial press are already circling the canapes, ready to preside over your triumph. I didn't look up from my tablet. It's our triumph, and it's an operational milestone, not a coronation. The journal piece is framing it as a masterclass in hostile to helpful investing. I had the PR team lean into that. Better than Gold Digger reforms Dynasty. He came around the desk, leaning against the window frame, looking at me. You can drop the CEO act for 5 minutes. Rowan, it's just me. We did it. We're here. The port is ours. The board is pacified. The stock is up. My father takes your calls before he takes my mother's. A wry smile touched his lips. You've won. Why do you look like you're preparing for an audit? I finally put the tablet down, swiveling to face him. The skyline was a blur of light behind him. Is it winning, Lucas? Or is it just a change in the type of warfare? Peabody and Crampton are still on the board, voting no on every initiative, leaking to the Post about family discord. Your mother has launched a charm offensive with every major society matron, painting me as a soul-sucking automaton who's destroyed her family's happiness. She's not fighting the business decisions. She's poisoning the well we have to drink from for the next 20 years. So, you expected a parade? His tone wasn't unsympathetic, just realistic. You dismantled their world. They're not going to send a thank you note. The business is healthier. That's the win. The rest is noise. Is it? I stood, walking to the window. The Van Holt Tower was a dark silhouette against the twilight. The noise is what makes the long game exhausting. Every board meeting is a political knife fight wrapped in procedural language. Every charity gala is a minefield of backhanded compliments. Your mother looks at me across a room, and it's not anger anymore. It's a cold, permanent hatred. It's corrosive. I was surprised to hear myself say it. I, who had built a fortress of logic and capital, was admitting to the weariness of perpetual siege. It felt like a vulnerability, and in our partnership, vulnerabilities were strategic liabilities. Lucas was quiet for a moment. I know, he said, his voice lower. I see it too. She calls me every Sunday. The conversation always finds its way to how cold you are, how I've been isolated. It's not an attack. It's a drip, 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 a psychological siege. Like you said, he pushed off the window, but we knew there'd be a cost. This is the cost. The alternative was letting them smother us in their version of family. I'll take the open warfare. He was right. Of course he was right. This was the deal we'd made. I'd just been so focused on the tactical victory that I'd glossed over the long-term occupational stress. I turned back to him. How do you handle it? The Sundays? A faint, tired smile. I hired a therapist. A very expensive, very discreet one. He tells me I'm processing narcissistic family system trauma and establishing healthy boundaries. Mostly, I just listen. Say, I'm sorry you feel that way, mother, and count the minutes until I can hang up. He shrugged. It's a management technique. You'd approve. I did. It was pragmatic. Maybe I need the name of that therapist. I'll have Anya send it. He walked over and picked up the folder he brought. In the meantime, we have a party to host and a next move to consider. He opened the folder. It was a preliminary dossier on a German family-owned industrial conglomerate, Hessler GmbH, that was faltering under the weight of succession issues and energy costs. Old world, solid assets, bad management. Sound familiar? I took the dossier. The familiar, clean thrill of a new strategic puzzle momentarily pushing the weariness aside. Familiar pattern, different geography. The playbook is proven. Our playbook, he corrected, a note of quiet pride in his voice. It was ours, forged in the fire of the wedding and tempered in the boardroom. We go in as the savvy, modern solution, a joint Thorn VH Holdings bid. We use the Van Holt industrial credibility and the Ether tech and capital dazzle. We split the executive oversight. You take digital and green energy transition. I take legacy workforce and EU regulatory. I felt the energy return. The purpose. This was the language that made sense. We'd need to consolidate our position at Van Holt first. The Hessler bid would be a massive distraction. We'd be fighting a war on 2 continents. Which is why, Lucas said, his eyes gleaming with the old, combative light, we use the success of the logistics turnaround to force a final showdown with the old guard at Van Holt. We call for a vote to expand the board, dilute Peabody and Crampton's influence. We bring in our own people. Elise Vance is ready for a bigger role. And Mark from Sequoia has been hinting he'd love a board seat somewhere, with real iron in the ground. We secure the home front, then would go empire building. I looked at him. This partner of mine, the spoiled heir was gone, burned away. In his place was a strategic mind that was beginning, in some ways, to outpace my own in its understanding of the long political game. The marriage had been a business arrangement. The partnership, against all odds, was becoming the most real thing in either of our lives. You've been thinking about this, I said, a statement, not a question. It's all I think about, he admitted. How to build what's next. With you, the wedding, that was the opening gambit. The board seat was consolidating the beachhead. This, he tapped the Hessler dossier, is the beginning of the real campaign. For our own legacy, not Van Holt, not Ether, ours. The word legacy hung between us. It was a word his family used, a weighty, burdensome word, but in his mouth. Here, now, it felt different, lighter, something to be built, not inherited. My intercom buzzed again. 5 minutes to the start of the port acquisition celebration. Anya said, and a delivery for you. Rowan, it's unusual. Lucas and I exchanged a glance. Send it in. Anya entered, holding a long, white cardboard box, the kind that might hold orchids. But it was plain, unmarked. She set it on the desk and withdrew, using a letter opener. I sliced the tape and lifted the lid. Nestled in tissue paper was not a flower. It was a single, antique, leather-bound ledger, the kind used a century ago. I lifted it out. It was heavy. Flipping it open, the pages were filled with precise, spidery copperplate handwriting detailing shipments of cotton, timber, and steel, dates from the 1920s. It was a Van Holt shipping ledger. There was no card, just the book. Lucas frowned. What is this? A peace offering for my father? A bizarre historical gift? I turned to the first page. There, tucked into the spine, was a small, faded photograph. A group of grim-faced men in suits standing before a docked freighter. One of them, a younger version of Lucas's grandfather, had his foot planted on a crate, and beside the crate, barely in the frame, was a black stevedore, back bent under a massive sack, his face a blur of exertion and anonymity. I understood then. It wasn't a gift. It was a message. From Victoria. It's a reminder. I said, my voice flat. I placed the photo on the ledger. This is the legacy. The one built on the backs of invisible men. The one she thinks I'm desecrating with my algorithms and my ambition. She's saying their wealth, their position, has a history, a weight, a substance that my digital billions lack. She's saying I'm a temporary glitch, a superficial operator. The real thing. I tapped the ledger. Is this blood, sweat, and ledgers? Lucas's face darkened. It's grotesque, sentimentalizing exploitation. That ledger is a record of inefficiency and human cost. Your algorithms do the work of 100 stevedores without breaking a single back. That's progress. That's the better legacy. Is it? I asked, the weariness returning, tinged with a new, philosophical bitterness. To her, and to the Peabodys of the world, my progress is sterile, soulless. It doesn't come with a story they can tell at the club. It's just better numbers. Then their stories are bankrupt. Lucas said with a sudden, fierce conviction. He took the ledger, walked to a sleek recycling bin by the door, and dropped it in. The thud was final. We're not building our future on their ghosts, Rowan. We're building it on what works, on clean energy, smart logistics, and a hell of a return on investment. If that doesn't have a soul, then I don't want one. I looked at the recycling bin, then at him. In that simple, defiant act, he had drawn a line more clearly than any boardroom vote ever could. He had chosen our future, and in doing so, had given me the answer to the corrosion, the antidote to Victoria's drip. Drip. Drip wasn't a counter-narrative. It was shared, purposeful action. It was the next deal, the next conquest, built side by side. I straightened my jacket, a slow, deliberate motion. Okay, I said. The word was a contract renewal. Then let's go down and show them what a soulless, wildly profitable future looks like. And tomorrow, we start the playbook on Hessler. The party in the Ether Capital atrium was a mirror image of the wedding, but with the power dynamics irrevocably flipped. Here, the energy was of unapologetic success. The tech titans, the venture capitalists, the restless moneyed, they were the center. The few Van Holt board members who'd come, like Elise Vance, were the curious visitors, studying the new ecosystem. Charles was not present. Victoria, of course, was not. Lucas and I moved through the crowd as a unit. We gave a short, joint speech.no teleprompter. Just two partners debriefing a successful mission. We talked about synergies, vertical integration, and market opportunities. The crowd ate it up. It was the opposite of romantic. It was powerfully, magnetically pragmatic. Later, on the terrace overlooking the Hudson, a glass of mineral water in my hand, I was approached by an older gentleman I didn't recognize as a friend of Lucas's from his Harvard days. I later learned. A remarkable rise. Mrs. Van Holt, he said, his tone jovial but his eyes sharp. The talk of the town. Some are calling you the new queen of New York. I gave him a thin smile. Titles are for fairy tales. I'm just a principal with a good team and a clear strategy. He chuckled. Modest. I like it, but you must allow for a little romance. The story is incredible. The wedding, the boardroom, it's like something out of a movie. I looked past him, to where Lucas was in deep conversation with Mark from Sequoia, undoubtedly already sketching out the Hessler bid. The story is a distraction, I said, my gaze returning to him. The balance sheet is the truth. And our balance sheet, I let the smile reach my eyes, just for a second, is the best story ever written. He laughed, genuinely this time, and raised his glass in salute before melting away. As the party wound down, I found Lucas again by the window, looking out at the city. The lights of the Van Holt Tower were still on, a few stubborn, distant stars in the older firmament. What are you thinking? I asked. I'm thinking about Germany, he said. I'm thinking about how we structure the bid. I'm thinking that we should fly to Dusseldorf next week. Feel them out in person. Old families like that, they need to look you in the eye. And what will they see when they look at us? I asked, genuinely curious. He turned to me. In the reflection of the glass, I saw our twin images, dot sharp, focused, aligned. They'll see the future, he said simply, and they'll be afraid of it, and then they'll sell it to us. Because that's what the future does. It makes the past obsolete, and then it buys it at a discount. A month later, we were in Dusseldorf, the meeting with the Hessler family patriarch, a man who reminded me of Charles, but with thicker spectacles and a deeper pessimism, was held in a room that smelled of cigars and fading relevance. We presented our joint vision. Lucas spoke of honoring their workforce, of a graceful transition. I spoke of energy independence through microgrids and predictive maintenance that would make their factories the most efficient in Europe. The old man listened, his son's point one competent but ignored, the other a wastrel glowering behind him. Afterwards, in the black Mercedes speeding back to the airport, Lucas exhaled. He'll take it. It'll take 6 months of negotiation. But he'll take it. He's tired. He sees the cliff. I nodded, scrolling through messages on my phone. One was from my mother, a photo of her and my dad on a long-delayed vacation, thanks to the windfall from my success. One was a headline from a business digest, The Van Holt Vanguard, How a Marriage Saved a Dynasty and Created a New One. I deleted it. The last was from a blocked number. It was a photo, taken from a distance, of me and Lucas boarding our private jet earlier that week. The text below read, "A gilded cage is still a cage. Do you ever miss the sunlight? Or has the glow of the screen replaced it? Victoria, the drip, 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 now crossing oceans." I showed the phone to Lucas. His face hardened, then, strangely, softened into something like pity. "Block it. Again. And then call your lawyer. We draw up the papers for a restraining order. Not a family matter. A security one. She's harassing a key executive of a publicly traded company. We treat it as a business risk." He was right. Again, I blocked the number. I typed a quick email to my legal team with the subject, "Security Protocol Update, Harassing Communications." Then I looked out at the gray German countryside flashing by. The weariness was there, a constant, low-grade hum. The warfare was permanent. The cost was real. But as I looked at Lucas, already back on his tablet, sketching notes on the Hessler capital structure, I felt the counterweight, the solid, unshakable bulk of a shared purpose. We were not a love story. We were something rarer, and in our world, more durable, a perfectly aligned merger of ambition and capability. We had built a fortress together, and though the siege might never lift, inside its walls, we had everything we needed to build an empire. The car sped on towards the runway, towards the next deal, the next conquest. The past, with its leather-bound ledgers and its poisonous whispers, was receding in the rearview mirror, a relic in a recycling bin. Ahead was the clean, hard, profitable future, and we were its architects.